to the Daily Coin. This is Rory, and I certainly appreciate you sticking around for part two of Alasdair Macleod's interview. Without any further ado, we're going to pick up right where we left off. Thank you very much. The central banks are buying gold, and we're told that they're selling gold. How is that possible? Or is it possible? Or help me to understand that, because I read both sides of that.
I don't see any central banks selling gold. They did sell gold quite some time ago, yes. I mean, let's put it this way: officially selling gold. Unofficially,
Okay.
of course, they will provide liquidity, ongoing provision of liquidity into the market. That, of course, goes on. And the way that happens is it just gets leased. I mean, I remember I think was it last year or the year before last, the Bank of Finland. The communications officer, in her personal blog run on the bank site in Finnish, said how 50% of Finland's gold reserves were out on lease.
Wow. Wow.
Now, this wasn't part of the official statement, but because I had some Finnish friends, I could get that translated. And I had two separate translations, and they coincided with the message. Yep, 50% of the gold is gone. Now, that equated to all the gold that the Central Bank of Finland kept at the Bank of England. So that's basically where the liquidity in the market is coming from, I think, to a large extent. Not totally, but to a large extent. The central banks that are buying are basically Asian. And when I look at Asia, and I'm sure I've mentioned this on your show before, you've got to talk in terms of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yep.
It is the organization which is headed by Russia and China, and all the various states between them are members. The rest of Asia is slated to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and I include in that Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, India. That's what, 5 or 6. Mongolia is due to join. Mongolia may already be in there, and I think Belarus is down there to join at some stage as well. So, putting all those together, you have got approximately just over 3 billion people. Now, there's about another 1.5 billion, I suppose, or billion or so in Southeast Asia. I'm talking about Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and so on. Now, those countries have a pretty good connection into China. There are lots of Chinese people there. The Chinese diaspora is in that part of the world. Do you think they're going to stand back and not trade with China? No, they're going to be. That is part of the market. So
Yes.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization encompasses the whole of Asia. Now, the thing that matters, I think, in terms of geopolitical strategy, is with respect to gold, is that bloc is using gold as one of its building blocks to take it away from depending on the dollar. It will use its own currency. The dollar will not have a look in. That is the objective. How long it will take to get there, we don't know. But that definitely is what China and Russia want. And the reason they want it is quite simple. Every transaction that happens in a dollar is reflected in a dollar bank account back in New York. They know that the Americans can check everything that goes on so long as the settlement is in the dollar. And they want to get away from that.
Yes.
And that's so, and China has accumulated gold. Of that, there is no doubt. I did some very extensive research into this a little while ago, I think, and I published an article about 3 weeks ago, which concluded that China could easily have acquired between 1983 and 2002 somewhere over 20,000 tons of gold. Now, that would then explain why China was happy to let the general public start buying gold from 2002 onwards. And it explains why China was happy to set up, under the control of the state through the People's Bank, the Shanghai Gold Exchange, which is the monopoly exchange for China for physical gold. And
Wow.
the gold that has been delivered from that is gold which is delivered into the wholesale market, and that is separate from any gold that is maintained in the vaults and held in allocated gold accounts with the banks. And there's something like 3 or 4 million accounts of that type. It is separate from all the gold that's mined and scrap gold. Now, the reason I know this is because there are no Chinese refinery gold bars, 1 kilo bars in circulation at all. They are all stockpiled. And if they are all stockpiled, then they're stockpiled by the government. Because otherwise, if they get into public hands, they would surface. And I know that because I talk to the refiners and I talk to the vaulting companies.
Okay.
And, you just don't see those bars. So anything that goes out of China, and there has been some gold going from China to Hong Kong because the jewelers in Hong Kong manufacture for the tourist trade. And I think 1 year it was as much as 200 tons. Not one bar seen. Not one bar of Chinese refined gold recorded. And that to me tells me that China is stockpiling around about 430 tons of mined gold at current rates. Also, scrap goes up and down, but it's a considerable figure because anything that is delivered out of the system, if you're going to sell it back into the system, it is treated as scrap.
Okay.
So when you had a good rise in the price of gold, such as we had in 2011, and also during part of 2012, scrap levels were really quite high. We're talking about 400 or 500 tons. So all that gets accumulated by the state. So if someone turned around to me and said, do you think it is possible that the Chinese government have got somewhere between 25 and 30,000 tons of gold, I would say not only is it possible, it is highly likely.
Wow. That's a lot of gold.
It is an awful lot of gold.
And the golden rule still applies. He who has the gold makes the rules.
That's correct. And it's also interesting. I mean, since we last spoke, we've seen that Russia has accumulated quite a lot of gold, and I know we mentioned that earlier on in this in this interview. But it's completely consistent with what China is doing, and I think the whole of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We also see countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, so they're all adding to their gold reserves.
Yes.
To my mind, I think that gold is going to be very much part of the cross-border settlement system that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization puts in place.
Well, why else would they be? Why would all of the stand countries and, like you said, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Rim countries, they're all acquiring gold. Vietnam is their central bank, we know, is buying a lot of gold, and Cambodia, I believe, they're all buying gold, and
That's right.
are acquiring it. I should say they're all acquiring gold, and they wouldn't be doing that if they weren't planning on utilizing it, because it is just a barbarous relic it's merely a tradition. And
no. I've got to pull you up short there, Rory. This barbarous relic was about the gold standard, and it was John Maynard Keynes, let's put aside whether Keynes was right or wrong. I've got very firm opinions on that, but I won't express them. If you go to Asia, they don't give a hoot about Keynes.
Correct.
They don't know who he is. They don't care. All they know is their government prints money, debases the currency, and the best thing you can do is to have your pension fund in gold. Yep. And that there's no other argument. It's actually as simple as that.
and that's it.
And I can also tell you something else, and that is that all Marxist economists learn one thing, and that is that capitalism will destroy itself. And so if you look at capitalism and you look at capitalism's currencies, I'm talking from the point of view of a Marxist trained in Moscow or trained in Beijing, then what do you see? You see Marx being right. We're destroying ourselves out here in the West. So, you know, equally, are you going to have a part of it? No, certainly
No.
not. You're going to try and hedge out of it.
Yes.
And this is the other reason, if you like. I mean, there's so many reasons you can put forward, but the other reason for the Chinese to have a large hoard of gold is that they have got a large hoard of treasuries as well.
Yes.
And if they can't have access to that, there is a crossover point in terms of the price of gold, which compensates them for the loss of those treasuries.
And that I believe that they are playing a part in keeping this price suppressed, that it's a way for them to acquire more gold so that they can offset the losses that everybody knows they're going to take when the bond market goes kaput, when it goes belly up.
My personal view is that it is not like the Chinese to interfere in the market. They are very, very clever users of the market, yes. But I think the idea that they go into the market and they suppress it, they suppress the futures so they can buy the physical, I don't think is right.
Okay.
The Chinese, the Chinese know the whole of the Western system is going to blow. They know that.
Yes.
And they're planning their escape from it. And the escape from it basically is that they're developing Asia as their market. I mean, Russia's got the resources, China's got the manufacturing capability. They have got a market of, it's going to be a bit over 4 billion people out of a total world population of 7 billion. When that happens, they don't care too much what happens to the rest of the world. But the one thing they're not going to do is to turn around and be blamed by the rest of the world for the rest of the world's misfortunes. It's actually something that we're bringing this on ourselves.
Yes.
And I think for the Chinese don't want to get involved. They don't want to get into any sort of, they don't want to be accused of precipitating a financial collapse in the West. It just doesn't make any sense to them. I think the Russians are a bit more aggressive on this, by the way. And the Russians do have a bit of power over us. But that's a sort of slightly separate subject. But I think the Chinese, I would say they're very clever users of the market, but they're not going to get themselves into a position where they get blamed when things go horribly wrong.
Well, and that actually makes a lot of sense because, just stand back and watch the carnage unfold in front of you and just go, well, that was fun. What's next?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you a good example of this. You've got collapsing oil prices. What are the Chinese doing? They're buying oil. They're saying, they're being entirely sensible. And apparently the best cargo shipping rates are shipping oil from the Middle East to China. I mean, they can't get enough of these super large tankers to transport the stuff while the price is low.
Might as well. I mean, that's what smart people do.
Well, yes, exactly. Why don't we do it, for goodness sake?
Well, I said smart people.
Yeah, well, that's what worried me.
I want to change gears just a little bit. A few weeks ago, it was about 3 weeks ago, Keith Neumeyer, I'm sure you saw this, where he came out in an interview and he called for the primary silver miners to pick a month in 2015 and withhold production for the month. And then yesterday, Jim Otis, in an open letter to all miners, is calling for all miners to withhold their precious metals, gold and silver, platinum, palladium, all of it. And Mr. Otis goes on to detail what to do, how to do, and the impact that it would have on the markets. And here's what he had to say in part, and this is a quote from his letter. Miners could withhold from the markets all physical metal that they have timing discretion over until after the delivery notices are issued. By withholding discretionary sales during the month before delivery notices are issued, and by telling potential buyers for the following month to take delivery of future contracts instead, mining companies could transform the earlier losses caused by dumping huge amounts of paper futures into gains as the traders who were betting they could sell short and then cover later are forced to buy at increasing prices because they do not have the metal required for delivery. That is a massive statement that he's making, and
Yes, it is. It's interesting on its
it
own.
is.
I don't think it's enough. I think what the Silver Institute, which is based in America, should do is they should go to COMEX and say, look, um, you know, we're in a ridiculous situation here. The silver miners are so hacked off by what's been going on in your market, COMEX, that you've got to do something about this. Otherwise, there is going to be a problem. And I think if you combine the undoubted raw emotion amongst the silver miners about the way the markets have treated them, with pressure on COMEX, then that is the best shot you can give it. If COMEX doesn't, fire on that one, then I'm not quite sure what they do, because the fact of the matter is that silver mines, with really very, very low prices, they need whatever cash flow they can get. They can't really follow through with a gesture like this beyond a very limited time.
I think that a month, and my synopsis, or I want to present this to you. Let's just say that 10 to 20% of the miners, and I mean all miners, base metal, because silver is primarily a byproduct.
Yeah.
If 10 to 20% of all miners took their gold and their silver, which are primarily byproducts of their base metal mining, and they set that aside, wouldn't that be wouldn't that have just a massive impact?
Well,
Or am I not seeing it right?
I think there is a point that everybody is ignoring in this, Rory, and that is that everybody involved in that industry relies on banks for their cash flow. And if you start doing this against JP Morgan, against HSBC, against all the rest of them, you will find that suddenly you got a banking problem. You may think you got a market problem, but it's nothing compared with the banking problem that you could well generate.
See, and that in itself, from my perspective, is criminal. I mean, that is because
Well,
that's holding an industry hostage.
the bit that's criminal is actually what's going on in terms of suppressing the price, if indeed that's what's happening. But the relationship between a banker, a lender and a borrower, basically the borrower is in a weak position. That is a fact of life. And if you put
Yes.
yourself into the position where you are a borrower, which all these mines are, then you've got to accept the weakness of your position, I'm afraid. I don't see there's anything wrong with that. I think that is standard commerce. But what is wrong is any manipulation that may occur in the market.
And what came out this morning, and this was reported by Bloomberg, and I picked it up over at MineWeb, and it says gold miners' costs are mostly higher than current spot prices, increasing the likelihood of write-downs next year, according to Nick Holland, CEO of Goldfields Limited. Across the industry, costs are about $1,300 an ounce, including debt repayments. He's talking about gold, of course.
Yeah.
Holland said by phone, citing analyst research. Gold dropped to 1182 an ounce, bringing the decline since the beginning of 2013 to 29%. And this is a quote from him: "The industry, by and large, is underwater, and I would expect further write-downs. Production, I think, will be curtailed, but it will take some time to filter through the system." I mean, this is the CEO of a very large gold mining operation telling the world flat out,
Yeah.
we're slowing down.
The industry's hurting very, very badly. Of that, there is no doubt.
I mean, so if something doesn't, I mean, if they're saying we're losing money right now, we're losing. I mean, he's citing about $120 an ounce,
Mm.
and if they're losing $120 an ounce, why not just stockpile it for a month and tell J.P. Morgan and HSBC and all the other bullion bank dealers that have them have them by the throat to hold on. Or
No, well, that's not going to work for the very simple reason that you owe money. You owe money to the very banks who are running the market. They've got you. The only action that a gold mine can take on these low prices is to try and churn out more gold, and that happens to an extent, and it happens for a brief period of time. And if the price doesn't recover smartly in the face of that extra supply, which as you and I have discussed, it's actually not all that important in the scheme of things. I mean, if the supply ends up being an extra couple of hundred tons in a year, it's not going to actually make a huge great difference. But there's a brief period of time where you can do that, where you can maybe go for slightly higher grades, because you will always have a higher grade. I mean, particularly with a deep mine as opposed to an alluvial mine, you can always get the slightly higher grades, which you've overlooked. You've deliberately set aside against the rainy day, as it were, in production terms, in terms of your mine management. But you can only do that to a certain extent. I think the mines are doing that right now, and I think that that's the only way they can really contain their costs. So it's not a nice situation at all, and it's the sort of thing that always happens, I think, at the end of a bear market in a commodity. We've got to recognize this as a signal that it is the time when the mines are really hurting like that. It's generally the time when it's right to buy.
it really is. I mean, that's why I'm following the Chinese lead.
Yes.
Getting as much as I can. There's got to be some way for these guys to take back control of their product, because I mean, even if they held back, we'll say a week, if they took 1 week out of the month and set that aside, and they did that for 4 or 5 months, and you've got, once again, only 10 to 20% of the miners doing that, I would think that would have some kind of an impact. I mean, I'm really hoping that these guys are going to get together, follow Mr. Neumeyer's suggestion, and really come together and try to create a single voice, because something's got to give.
All I can say, Rory, is that any miner that tries to do that better find another banker.
I would think
that's the problem. That is the problem. I mean, what you could do is you could probably experiment with sort of bonds that pay a gold dividend or something like that. You probably market that, but and I'm surprised in a way that more people aren't trying that. I don't know whether it's because people haven't thought of it, or whether it's because the if you like, the sort of the capital raising community, as it were, in the main financial centres haven't sort of promoted this. But I would have thought that, at this price, if you were to issue a bond which was indexed to the price of gold, or even paid a dividend in gold, let's say, you declare a dividend in so many sort of parts of a gram, I would have thought that that would find buyers.
I would think.
Yeah,
I know that's being talked about quite a bit at this point.
Yeah.
So,
but I haven't seen it. Well, I don't follow. I must admit, I don't follow the market anymore. As an old-fashioned stockbroker, I've sort of given up on that side. But I think it would make sense. I mean, if I was in the capital raising industry, I'd be around at the mines saying, how's cash flow going, boys? Oh, sorry to hear it's not so good. Have I got a suggestion for you?
Yeah, I hope that something gives for them, because, and I hope that something gives to the point to where we can actually get the market back. If it takes some kind of renegade situation for these guys to do something that's completely out of the box, then I welcome it, because, like we had discussed earlier, when does the rule of law apply? When is somebody going to stand up and say, well, this doesn't look right? And we need to look at it honestly, and we need to look at it realistically and dig into it. And that's just not happening.
Mm.
I
I
mean,
think, if I can paraphrase, was it someone? There was you had a lady in New York, something Hemsley or something, who said that taxes are for little people. I think laws are for little people as far as governments and the establishment are concerned,
that's exactly right.
which is a bit sad. But I think what I was saying earlier about the change in emphasis from monetary policy, perhaps, to deficit spending by governments, I think that that actually could be a catalyst for a switch in the markets, a very big switch in the markets. Obviously, bond yields would start rising somewhat, and governments would hope not too much. Um, Rising bond yields would undermine equity markets. They would fall, I think, quite sharply. And the effect could well be that people start looking at gold again, because the natural consequence of government spending money in the economy, boosting GDP by that route and all that stuff, will be to drive up prices very much on consumer items, bound to. So instead of the inflation being restricted to asset prices, I think it's likely to move very, very quickly into the sort of consumer goods end of the story. And that being the case, the gold price and the silver price could take off like a rocket.
Which we would all like to see.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean,
Well, to a degree.
yeah, exactly. I feel slightly sort of paranoid about this, because
Yes.
If the gold price takes off, as I think it is likely to do, we really are looking potentially at the destruction of the current monetary system. Now, that's going to produce an awful lot of uncertainty and hardship for a lot of people, and I think it would be wrong to wish that. But what I do wish for is a return to some sort of honesty in the markets, which is really what you and I have been discussing.
Yeah, that's all I'm asking for. I mean, I just want some honesty, some truth to be spread, and for us to, and us being all the little people here, to be able to share in that. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not I'm not asking for too much. Just stop stealing from me, stop lying to me, and give me some honest money. I mean, I'm not.
Yes.
It's not like I'm I'm demanding. I want eternal wealth for me and my family. I'm
Yeah.
not. That's not what I'm demanding. I just demand that things be done honestly.
Well, eternal wealth, dream on. Honesty from governments, equally dream on.
Oh well, as they say, one can dream. Well, with that, Alistair, I've kept you way longer than I ever anticipated. You have a wonderful evening, and I certainly appreciate the time and the knowledge. And we will talk with you soon, my friend.
It's been very much my pleasure, and thanks for letting me on your show, Rory.
Thank you, Alistair. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay then.
Bye bye.
Bye.